The scent of burning bread jolted Clara Edwards awake at 4 in the morning, and she knew immediately that her life in La Junta, Colorado, was about to change forever. She threw off her thin blankets and rushed to the small iron stove in the corner of the kitchen, grabbing a cloth to pull out the loaves before they turned to complete charcoal. 3 of the 6 loaves were salvageable, barely. The other 3 looked like lumps of coal. Clara stared at them in dismay, her heart sinking. This was supposed to be her first morning baking for the ranch hands at the Double Creek Ranch, and she had already failed. Her father had died 3 months ago, leaving her alone in this harsh territory with nothing but debts and a small house on the edge of town. The banker had given her 2 weeks to come up with the money owed, or she would lose everything. When Martha Henderson, the cook at the Double Creek Ranch, had broken her leg falling down the porch steps, Clara had seen it as providence. She had approached the ranch owner, Samuel Morton, and begged for the temporary position. He had been hesitant at first, a young woman of 21 years working alone among rough cowboys, but Clara had convinced him she could handle herself. Her father had been a baker before he took ill, and she had learned everything from him. But now, looking at the ruined loaves, Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She could not afford to fail. Not now. Not when everything depended on this job. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. There was still time. She could make more dough, let it rise quickly in the warm kitchen, and have fresh bread ready by the time the men came in for breakfast at 6. It would be close, but she could do it. Clara worked with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through the familiar motions of measuring flour, salt, yeast. Her father had taught her that bread was more than just food. It was comfort, it was home, it was love made tangible. She kneaded the dough with steady pressure, feeling the texture change under her palms, becoming smooth and elastic. As she worked, the sky outside slowly lightened from black to deep purple to pale pink. The dough rose faster than she expected in the warm kitchen, and by the time she heard the sounds of men stirring in the bunkhouse across the yard, she had 6 perfect loaves in the oven, their tops browning beautifully. Clara quickly moved to prepare the rest of breakfast. Bacon sizzled in the large skillet, eggs cracked and fried, coffee boiled strong and black. By the time the first ranch hand pushed through the door, stomping dust from his boots, the table was laden with food. More men filed in, their faces weathered and tired from the early morning. They nodded to her politely but said little, taking their seats at the long wooden table. Clara recognized a few faces from town, but most were strangers. She tried not to feel nervous as she served them, filling plates and cups with steady hands. Then he walked in. Nathan Morrison stood in the doorway for a moment, his hat in his hands, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a gentleness in his face that seemed at odds with the rough clothing and the gun belt at his hip. He could not have been much older than her, perhaps 24 or 25. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "Good morning," Clara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please sit. There is plenty." Nathan took a seat at the far end of the table, away from the other men. Clara noticed that while the others talked and joked roughly, Nathan ate in silence, his eyes often distant, as if his thoughts were somewhere far away. She brought the bread to the table last, slicing it fresh so steam rose from the soft interior. The men reached for it eagerly, slathering it with butter. Clara watched nervously as they took their first bites. The room fell silent. One of the older hands, a grizzled man named Pete, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Miss Edwards, this is the finest bread I have tasted in 20 years of ranch work." The other men murmured their agreement, reaching for second and third slices. Clara felt relief flood through her, followed by a warm glow of pride. But it was Nathan who truly caught her attention. He had taken a single slice and was eating it slowly, his eyes closed, a look of something like peace on his face. When he opened his eyes and looked at her, Clara felt her breath catch. "This tastes like home," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried such weight that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes again, though this time for an entirely different reason. After breakfast, the men filed out to begin their work. Nathan was the last to leave, and he paused at the door, turning back to face her. "Thank you, Miss Edwards. That was the best meal I have had in a very long time." "You are welcome," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but then simply nodded and left, placing his hat back on his head as he stepped into the bright morning sunlight. Clara spent the rest of the day cleaning, preparing for the evening meal and trying not to think about the quiet cowboy with the sad eyes. But he kept creeping into her thoughts, unbidden and persistent. That evening she made stew with dumplings and another batch of bread. The men were just as enthusiastic as they had been at breakfast, and Clara began to relax into the rhythm of the work. This was something she knew, something she was good at. Nathan again sat apart from the others, eating slowly and speaking little. But when he caught her eye, he gave her a small smile that made her heart skip. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn again, this time without burning anything. She found a rhythm in the work, a satisfaction in feeding hungry men and seeing their faces light up with pleasure. The ranch hands began to linger a bit longer after meals, complimenting her cooking, telling jokes and stories. But Nathan remained quiet, always polite but distant. On the fourth day, as the men were leaving after breakfast, Nathan approached her. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "Miss Edwards, I was wondering if I might have a word with you." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "Of course." The other men had already left, and they were alone in the dining room. Nathan seemed to struggle with what he wanted to say, his eyes fixed on his hat. "I know it is forward of me, and I apologize if I am speaking out of turn, but I wanted to tell you that your bread reminds me of my mother's. She died when I was 12, and I have not tasted anything like it since. It has been bringing back memories I thought I had lost." Clara's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "I am so sorry for your loss. I lost my father recently, so I understand how those memories can be both beautiful and painful." Nathan looked up at her then, and in his eyes she saw a kindness and understanding that took her breath away. "I heard about your father. He was a good man. I bought bread from him many times when I was in town." "You did?" Clara felt a connection forming, fragile but real. "Yes, he always had a kind word, even for a rough cowboy like me." Nathan paused, then took a deep breath. "Miss Edwards, I know this is presumptuous, but I wanted to ask if you might consider staying on permanently at the ranch, even after Mrs. Henderson recovers. Your cooking brings something to this place that has been missing. It brings light." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I would need to speak with Mr. Morton about that." "I already did," Nathan said quickly. "This morning before breakfast. He said if you were willing, he would hire you permanently at a fair wage, better than what he was paying Mrs. Henderson, seeing as how the men are happier than he has seen them in years." Clara's mind raced. A permanent position would solve all her problems. She could pay off her father's debts, keep the house, have security. But more than that, it would mean staying near Nathan, getting to know this quiet man who spoke of her bread as if it were poetry. "I accept," she said. Nathan's face broke into a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him, and it transformed his features entirely. "I am glad, very glad." Over the following weeks, Clara settled into life at the Double Creek Ranch. She moved into a small room off the kitchen, keeping her father's house in town for weekends. The work was hard but satisfying. She baked bread every morning, experimenting with different recipes. Sourdough with a crispy crust, soft white loaves perfect for sopping up gravy, sweet rolls studded with raisins for special occasions. The ranch hands adored her, treating her with a respect that bordered on reverence. But it was Nathan she found herself watching for, Nathan whose opinion mattered most. He began staying after meals to help her clean up, despite her protests that it was not necessary. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts. Nathan told her about growing up in Kansas, about losing his mother to fever and his father to drink 2 years later. He had drifted west, working on various ranches, never staying long in any one place. "I have always felt like I was searching for something," he admitted one evening as they washed dishes together. "But I never knew what it was, until I tasted your bread." Clara looked at him in surprise. "My bread?" Nathan set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her fully. "It made me remember what it felt like to have a home, to have someone care enough to put love into the food they make. It made me realize what I have been searching for all these years." "And what is that?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A place to belong. Someone to belong to." Nathan's eyes held hers, and Clara saw in them a longing that matched her own. She wanted to close the distance between them, to reach out and touch his face, but propriety held her back. "I think I understand. I have felt adrift since my father died. But here, cooking for all of you, it gives me purpose." "It is more than that," Nathan said. "At least it is for me. Clara, I know I am just a cowboy with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle, but I find myself thinking about you all the time. When I am out mending fences, when I am riding the range, when I am lying in my bunk at night, you are always in my thoughts." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nathan, I think about you too, more than I should, perhaps. Would it be too bold of me to ask if I might court you properly?" Nathan asked, his voice trembling slightly with hope and fear. "It would not be too bold at all," Clara said, smiling through her tears. "I would like that very much." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, but his touch was gentle. "Then, with your permission, I would like to call on you this Sunday when you go into town." "I would be honored," Clara said. That Sunday, Nathan arrived at her father's house wearing his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. He brought her wildflowers he had picked from the meadow near the ranch, and Clara arranged them in a jar with trembling hands. They walked through La Junta together, past the general store and the church, down to the creek that ran along the edge of town. It was late summer of 1882, and the cottonwood trees were thick with green leaves that rustled in the warm breeze. They sat on the bank of the creek, and Nathan told her more about his dreams. He wanted to have his own small ranch someday, nothing grand, just enough to raise some cattle and horses. He wanted a family, children to pass his knowledge to, a wife who would stand beside him through good times and bad. "I never thought I would find someone who could see past the rough exterior to the man underneath," Nathan admitted. "Most women in town look at cowboys like we are beneath them." "Then they are fools," Clara said firmly. "You are one of the kindest, most genuine men I have ever met. You work hard, you treat others with respect, and you have a good heart. What more could anyone ask for?" Nathan looked at her with such intensity that Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You see me as I wish to be seen. That is a rare gift, Clara." As summer faded into autumn, their courtship deepened. Nathan came to town every Sunday without fail, and they spent their afternoons walking, talking, learning each other's hearts. At the ranch, they maintained propriety, but there were stolen glances across the dining room, brushed hands when he helped her carry supplies, smiles that spoke of private jokes and growing affection. The other ranch hands noticed, of course, and they teased Nathan mercilessly when Clara was not around. But it was good-natured ribbing, and even the roughest of the cowboys seemed pleased to see their quiet companion finding happiness. One evening in October, after the dinner dishes were done and the ranch had settled into quiet, Nathan asked Clara to walk with him. The air was crisp and cool, smelling of wood smoke and approaching winter. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear sky. Nathan led her to the corral where his horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Copper, stood dozing. He had been teaching Clara to ride over the past weeks, patient with her nervousness and encouraging with her small successes. "I have something I want to ask you," Nathan said, his voice nervous. "But first, I want you to understand what I am offering. I spoke with Mr. Morton yesterday, and he has agreed to sell me the north section of the ranch. It is 160 acres, with good water and grazing. I have been saving my wages for 6 years, and I finally have enough for the down payment." Clara's eyes widened. "Nathan, that is wonderful." "It is a start," Nathan said. "Just a start. I will need to build a house, a barn, get a small herd going. It will be years of hard work and there will be lean times, but it would be mine, ours if you would have it." Clara's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" Nathan took both her hands in his. "Clara Edwards, I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your kindness, your strength, your courage. I love the way you put your whole heart into everything you do. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on a recipe. I love that you saw something worthwhile in a wandering cowboy with nothing but dreams." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. "Nathan, I am asking you to marry me, to build a life with me. I cannot promise you riches or an easy life, but I can promise you that I will work every day to make you happy. I will honor you, protect you, and love you until my last breath. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "Yes, Nathan, I will marry you." Nathan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Clara rested her head against his chest, hearing the rapid beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other under the stars, their future stretching out before them bright with possibility. "I want to do this right," Nathan said softly. "I want to speak with the pastor, have a proper wedding in the church. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours." "I want that too," Clara said. They set the date for December, giving them time to prepare. Clara continued working at the ranch, but now she baked with even more joy, knowing that she was baking for her future husband. Nathan threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, saving every penny he could for their new life together. The other ranch hands were delighted by the news. They took up a collection and presented Nathan with enough money to buy Clara a ring, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone. When Nathan slipped it on her finger, Clara thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. The weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. The women of La Junta, who had kept their distance when Clara first arrived, now embraced her as one of their own. They helped her sew a wedding dress from cream-colored wool, practical but lovely. They shared recipes and advice, welcoming her into the community of married women. Martha Henderson, recovered from her broken leg, came to visit and gave Clara her blessing. "That ranch has never run smoother than when you were in charge of the kitchen," she said with a warm smile. "And I have never seen Nathan Morrison smile so much. You two are well matched." The wedding took place on a cold December morning in the small church in La Junta. The building was packed with ranch hands, townspeople, and friends. Clara wore her new dress and carried a bouquet of pine boughs tied with ribbon, the only greenery available in winter. When Nathan turned to watch her walk down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. He looked handsome in his Sunday suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face shining with love and hope. The pastor led them through the vows, their voices steady and sure as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other. When Nathan kissed her as his wife, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall. Clara had spent days baking bread, rolls, and cakes. The ranch hands brought roasted meat and vegetables. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was music and dancing. Nathan held Clara close as they danced, his hand warm on her waist. "Mrs. Morrison," he said softly, testing out her new name. "My wife." "My husband," Clara replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They spent their first night together in Clara's small house in town, the one she had nearly lost before finding work at the ranch. Nathan was gentle and patient, and Clara discovered that physical love was yet another way to express the devotion they felt for each other. In the morning, they woke tangled together in the narrow bed, and Nathan kissed her forehead. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," Clara said, feeling shy and bold all at once. "I suppose we should get to work on our new home," Nathan said. "The sooner we build it, the sooner we can truly begin our life together." Over the next months, they threw themselves into creating their homestead. Nathan had already started building a small cabin on his new land, working on it during his days off. Now, with winter making outdoor work difficult, he focused on the interior while Clara planned the kitchen that would be the heart of their home. She continued baking at the ranch during the week, and Nathan continued working there as well. Mr. Morton had agreed to let Nathan stay on as a hand while he got his own operation established, understanding that it would take time to build up a herd. By early spring of 1883, the cabin was finished. It was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms, a bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room. Clara had saved enough to buy a new stove, larger than the one she had used before, perfect for her baking. On the day they moved in, Nathan carried Clara over the threshold, both of them laughing with joy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison." Clara looked around the simple space and felt a peace settle over her. This was theirs. They had built it with their own hands, and they would fill it with love. She immediately set to work making bread, christening the new stove. The smell of baking filled the small cabin, and when Nathan came in from tending to their 3 new cows, his face lit up. "That smell," he said. "That is the smell of home." They ate the bread warm with butter, sitting close together on the bench Nathan had built. Outside, the spring rain pattered gently on the roof, but inside they were warm and dry and together. "Clara," Nathan said, setting down his bread, "I know I tell you this every day, but I love you more than I can express. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." "You have given me the same," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "When my father died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would lose everything, but instead I found you." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "We found each other, and we are going to build something beautiful here." As spring turned to summer, their little homestead began to flourish. Nathan built a chicken coop, and Clara tended a vegetable garden. Their small herd of cattle grew as Nathan carefully saved and invested. He still worked at the Double Creek Ranch 3 days a week, but the other days he spent on their own land, mending fences, digging a new well, building a barn. Clara continued to bake, not just for themselves but for the ranch and for people in town. Word had spread about her bread, and folks began placing orders. She baked in the cool of the early morning, and Nathan would deliver the loaves to town in the afternoon. On Sundays, they attended church together and spent the afternoons with friends. They had become part of the community in a way Clara had never expected. She was no longer the poor girl with the dead father and mounting debts. She was Mrs. Nathan Morrison, wife of a respected rancher, known throughout La Junta for her bread. But more than any of that, she was loved. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara took Nathan's hand and placed it on her belly. "Nathan, I have something to tell you." He looked at her, his eyes questioning. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Nathan simply stared at her, his face frozen in shock. Then joy spread across his features like the dawn. He let out a whoop of delight and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she begged him to stop, laughing breathlessly. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "In the spring," Clara said. "Around March, I think." Nathan knelt before her and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your papa is already so proud of you." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. They had been married less than a year, but already their family was growing. The months of Clara's pregnancy were some of the happiest of their lives. Nathan was attentive and protective, insisting she not overwork herself. Clara ignored him for the most part, continuing to bake and tend the house, though she did allow him to take over some of the heavier chores. As her belly grew round, she had to adjust how she worked, but she never stopped. Baking was part of who she was, and she wanted their child to know the smell of fresh bread, just as she had known it growing up. The women of La Junta rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. She felt blessed to be part of such a caring community. Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows that made travel difficult. Nathan stayed close to home, only going into town when absolutely necessary. He spent the long evenings carving a cradle for the baby, his hands shaping the wood with patience and love. Clara watched him work, her hands busy with knitting small booties and caps. "What do you hope for, a boy or a girl?" "I do not care," Nathan said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you are safe, that is all that matters to me." "I think a boy," Clara said. "A son to teach all your skills to help you run the ranch." "And if it is a girl?" Nathan asked with a smile. "Then she will learn to ride and rope just as well as any boy, and she will bake the finest bread in Colorado." Nathan laughed. "Either way, our child will be remarkable because they will have you as a mother." In early March, just as the first signs of spring began to show, Clara's pains began. Nathan rode hard to town to fetch the doctor and the midwife, his heart in his throat with fear and anticipation. The labor was long and difficult. Nathan paced outside the bedroom, praying harder than he ever had in his life. The sounds of Clara's pain tore at his heart, but there was nothing he could do but wait. Finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and loud. The midwife opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Morrison, a big, healthy boy. And your wife is doing well." Nathan rushed into the room. Clara lay propped against pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiating joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Nathan approached slowly, almost reverently. "Come meet your son," Clara said softly. Nathan sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "You are perfect. Clara, you have given me the world." "We made him together," Clara said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to decide. But now, looking at his son, Nathan knew. Daniel Morrison. "After your father?" Clara asked. "My father was not a good man," Nathan said, "but the name is a good one and our son will make it honorable." "Daniel it is." Clara smiled and kissed the baby's forehead. "Welcome, Daniel. Welcome to your family." The weeks after Daniel's birth were exhausting but joyful. Nathan took over all the household chores, insisting Clara rest and heal. He changed diapers, walked the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night, and gazed at his son with a wonder that never seemed to fade. Clara recovered slowly, her strength returning bit by bit. She began baking again after a few weeks, Daniel sleeping in his cradle near the warm stove while she worked. The baby seemed soothed by the familiar sounds and smells of the kitchen. As spring progressed into summer, they settled into new routines as a family of 3. Nathan continued building up their ranch, working from dawn until dusk. Clara tended the house and the baby, still baking bread that was the talk of La Junta. People came from miles around to buy her loaves now. Some said it was the best bread in all of Colorado. Clara knew the secret was simple. She baked with love, each loaf an expression of the joy she felt in her life. When Daniel was 6 months old and sitting up on his own, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less surprising but no less joyful. "We are going to have our hands full," Nathan said with a laugh, but his eyes shone with happiness. "We will manage," Clara said. "We always do." Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in February of 1885. She came into the world more quickly than Daniel had, with a lusty cry that spoke of a strong will. She had Clara's blonde hair and Nathan's gray eyes. Now their little cabin felt truly full. Nathan expanded it that summer, adding another room so the children would not be too crowded as they grew. He also built a proper bread oven outside, a large clay structure where Clara could bake multiple loaves at once. Her baking business continued to grow. She had more orders than she could fill, even working from early morning until late afternoon. Nathan suggested they hire help, and soon a young woman from town named Emily came 3 days a week to assist with the baking and mind the children. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Their ranch prospered, slowly but surely. Nathan was able to buy more land, expand his herd. He hired his first ranch hand in 1886, then 2 more in 1887. They were becoming a proper operation. Clara's bread was now sold in the general store in La Junta and in 3 neighboring towns. She had developed a reputation across the region. People spoke of Morrison's bread with reverence, and cowboys riding through would detour just to buy a loaf. But no matter how busy she became, Clara always made sure to bake fresh bread for their own table. It was a ritual, a connection to her father and her past, and a daily expression of love for her family. In 1888, their 3rd child was born, another boy they named Thomas. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. Daniel, now 5, was proud to be a big brother and helped Clara with the younger children. Nathan and Clara sometimes marveled at how far they had come. From 2 lonely, lost souls to a thriving family with a successful ranch and business. They had built it all through hard work, determination, and love. One evening, after putting the children to bed, they sat together on the porch as they had done so many times before. The stars overhead were brilliant, and the air was sweet with the smell of hay and summer flowers. "Do you remember the first time you tasted my bread?" Clara asked, leaning against Nathan's shoulder. "I will never forget it," Nathan said. "I thought I had died and gone to heaven, and then I looked at you, really looked at you, and I knew my life was about to change." "You told me it tasted like home," Clara said. "It did. It does. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever when my mother died. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and put down roots. You gave me a home, Clara. You are my home." Clara turned to kiss him, and even after years of marriage, she felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first morning in the ranch kitchen. "And you gave me a life worth living. When my father died, I thought I was alone in the world. But you showed me that family is not just about blood. It is about choosing to love someone every single day." "I choose you," Nathan said. "Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. In the house behind them, their children slept peacefully. In the barn, their horses nickered softly. Across their land, their cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of Nathan's ranch hands. It was a good life, better than either of them had dared to dream. As the years continued to pass, their family and their enterprises grew in tandem. In 1890, Clara opened a small bakery in La Junta itself. It was a simple storefront, but it allowed her to expand her operation significantly. She hired 3 women to work with her, teaching them her recipes and techniques. Nathan worried she was taking on too much, but Clara thrived on the work. Daniel, now 7, often came to the bakery after school to help. He had inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's attention to detail. Clara loved working beside her son, teaching him as her father had taught her. Grace, at 5, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. She wanted to try everything, do everything, be everywhere at once. She climbed trees with her brothers, helped Nathan in the barn, and demanded to learn how to ride almost before she could walk properly. Thomas, at 2, was still quiet but observant. He missed nothing, storing up information with a serious expression that made adults smile. In 1892, Clara gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Rose. She came as a surprise, as Clara had thought she was done having children. But Rose fit into their family as if there had always been a space waiting for her. Nathan, now in his 30s, had become a respected figure in La Junta and the surrounding area. His ranch was one of the most successful in the region, known for the quality of his cattle and horses. He served on the town council and was frequently consulted on matters of local importance. But he never forgot where he had come from or what truly mattered. Every morning, no matter how busy he was, he made time to kiss his wife and children. Every evening, he came home for dinner, sitting at the head of a table laden with good food and surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, and there was always fresh bread. Clara never stopped baking, even as her business grew and she could afford to hire others to do it. Baking was her meditation, her prayer, her way of showing love. She taught all her children how to bake, just as her father had taught her. Daniel showed real aptitude for it, his breads rising high and even, his crusts golden and crisp. Grace was impatient with the slow process, preferring to help her father with the horses. Thomas surprised everyone by developing a talent for decorative baking, creating intricate designs with dough. Rose was still too young to do much, but she loved to play with scraps of dough at the table while Clara worked. In 1895, when Daniel was 12, he told his parents he wanted to become a baker like his mother, not a rancher like his father. Nathan felt a moment of disappointment, having assumed his eldest son would take over the ranch someday, but it passed quickly. "You should follow your passion," Nathan told Daniel. "I did, and it brought me to your mother. Do what makes you happy, son." Clara worked with Daniel more seriously then, teaching him not just the basics but the artistry of baking. How to judge dough by feel, how to know when the oven was the right temperature, how to adjust recipes based on weather and altitude. Daniel absorbed it all like a sponge, his young face serious with concentration. Grace, at 10, announced she wanted to be a rancher. She followed Nathan everywhere, learning to rope and brand, to judge the quality of cattle, to read the weather. Nathan was secretly delighted to have a child who shared his passion, even if it was unexpected that it would be his daughter. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew, the business prospered, and Nathan and Clara's love deepened with each passing year. They had weathered hard times together, years when drought threatened their cattle and late spring freezes killed Clara's wheat supply. But they always came through, relying on each other and their faith. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1897, Nathan surprised Clara with a trip to Denver. They left the children with friends and took the train north, spending 3 days in the big city. They stayed in a hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights, marveling at the modern conveniences. They ate in fancy restaurants and went to a show at the theater. But what Clara treasured most was simply having time alone with Nathan, walking through the city streets hand in hand, talking and laughing like they had when they were courting. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked one evening as they sat in their hotel room. "Marrying me, I mean." "You could have had an easier life." Clara looked at him in genuine surprise. "Nathan Morrison, how can you even ask that? You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built together is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I know you work so hard," Nathan said. "Between the bakery and the children and the house, I worry sometimes that you are exhausted." "I am tired sometimes," Clara admitted. "But I am happy, Nathan, truly, deeply happy. I get to do work I love with people I love in a place I love. What more could I possibly want?" Nathan pulled her close and kissed her. "I love you, Clara Morrison. I loved you the moment I tasted your bread, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you," Clara said, "my wandering cowboy who finally found his home." They returned to La Junta refreshed and reconnected, ready to tackle the challenges of their busy life. The children were thrilled to have them back, though they had been well cared for in their absence. As the century drew to a close, Nathan and Clara found themselves reflecting on how much the world had changed since they married in 1882. Automobiles were beginning to appear, though they were still rare. Electric lights were coming to La Junta. The railroad had expanded, connecting their small town to the wider world in ways that had been impossible before. But some things remained constant: the need for hard work, the value of family, the comfort of home-baked bread. In 1900, Daniel turned 17 and announced he wanted to open his own bakery. Not in La Junta, but in the growing town of Pueblo, about 60 miles east. It was hard for Clara to imagine her firstborn leaving home, but she knew it was time. She helped him set up his bakery, sharing her suppliers and recipes, giving him her blessing and her love. Grace, at 15, was already helping Nathan run the ranch. She had a natural gift for it, and the ranch hands respected her despite her age and gender. She could outride and outrope most of them, and she had inherited her father's calm demeanor in a crisis. Thomas, at 12, was quieter than his siblings but no less determined. He had decided he wanted to be an artist, drawing and painting the landscape around them. Nathan and Clara encouraged him, even though it was an unconventional choice. They had learned that forcing children into predetermined paths led only to unhappiness. Rose, at 8, was still figuring out her place in the family. She loved stories and books, spending hours reading everything she could get her hands on. Clara suspected she might become a teacher or perhaps a writer. Watching their children grow into their own people filled Nathan and Clara with pride and a bittersweet awareness of time passing. They were no longer the young couple just starting out. They were in their early 40s now, with gray beginning to show in their hair and lines around their eyes. But their love had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by the years of partnership and shared experiences. One autumn evening in 1902, after the children were in bed, Clara and Nathan walked out to the small rise behind their house. They could see the lights of La Junta in the distance and their own land stretching out around them. "Remember when this was all just a dream?" Nathan asked, his arm around Clara's waist. "I remember when we had nothing but hope and determination," Clara said. "And bread," Nathan added with a smile. "Do not forget the bread," Clara laughed. "How could I forget? That bread changed both our lives." "You changed my life," Nathan corrected. "The bread was just the beginning. It was you, Clara. Your strength, your kindness, your capacity for love. You took a broken, drifting cowboy and gave him a reason to live. And you took a frightened, grieving girl and gave her a future worth believing in," Clara said. "We saved each other, Nathan." They stood together in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, and countless moments of joy and sorrow in between. "What do you think the future holds?" Nathan asked. "More of this," Clara said contentedly. "More hard work, more challenges, more love, watching our children build their own lives. Maybe grandchildren someday, growing old together." "Growing old together," Nathan repeated. "I like the sound of that." And they did grow old together, year by year, season by season. Their hair turned fully gray, their steps became slower, but their commitment to each other never wavered. Daniel's bakery in Pueblo thrived, and in 1905 he married a lovely young woman named Anne. They gave Nathan and Clara their first grandchild in 1906, a boy they named Nathan after his grandfather. Clara wept when she held him, overwhelmed by the continuation of their family line. Grace shocked everyone by falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet, hard-working young man named James. They married in 1907, and Grace took over full management of the ranch, with Nathan as an advisor. She proved to be every bit as capable as her father, perhaps even more innovative. Thomas went to art school in Denver and became a successful painter, his landscapes of Colorado highly sought after. He never married, content with his art and his independence, but he visited often and remained close to his family. Rose became a teacher, just as Clara had suspected she might. She taught at the school in La Junta, inspiring a new generation of children with her love of learning. By 1910, Nathan and Clara had officially retired from the day-to-day operations of both the ranch and the bakery. Grace managed the ranch with her husband, and Daniel had expanded to 3 bakeries across southern Colorado, all using Clara's original recipes. Nathan and Clara moved into a smaller house in town, one with a garden where Clara could grow herbs and vegetables, and a workshop where Nathan could tinker with carpentry projects. They spent their days in peaceful companionship, reading, gardening, visiting with their growing number of grandchildren. But Clara never stopped baking. Every morning she made bread, just 1 or 2 loaves now instead of dozens. The smell of it filled their small house, a constant that had carried through their entire life together. One morning in early spring of 1912, Nathan woke to that familiar smell and smiled. He got up slowly, his joints stiff with age, and made his way to the kitchen. Clara stood at the counter, kneading dough with the same practiced movements she had used for 30 years. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the marks of time, but to Nathan she was as beautiful as she had been that first morning in the ranch kitchen. "Good morning, my love," he said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Good morning," Clara said, leaning back against him. "I am making your favorite sourdough with rosemary." "You spoil me," Nathan said. "After 30 years, I think I am allowed to spoil you," Clara replied with a smile. They stood like that for a moment, swaying slightly, comfortable in the intimacy of long marriage. Then Clara went back to her kneading, and Nathan sat at the table to watch her work. "Do you remember what I said to you the first time I tasted your bread?" Nathan asked. "You said it tasted like home," Clara replied without looking up. "And then I asked you to bake forever," Nathan said softly. Clara paused in her work and turned to look at him, her eyes bright with memory. "You did not ask that first day. You asked if I would stay on at the ranch, and later, much later, you asked me to marry you. But the intention was the same," Nathan said. "I wanted you to bake forever for me, for our family, and you did. You have filled our lives with such sweetness, Clara." "It has been my joy," Clara said simply. She finished kneading the dough and shaped it into a round loaf, placing it in a bowl to rise. Then she washed her hands and came to sit beside Nathan at the table. "We have had a good life, have we not?" she asked. "The best," Nathan agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They sat together, holding hands as morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. Outside, they could hear the sounds of La Junta waking up, children on their way to school, wagons rolling down the street, neighbors calling greetings to each other. Their own children were grown and thriving, each building their own version of success. Their grandchildren numbered 7 now, with another on the way. The ranch they had built from nothing was prosperous and well managed. The bakery business had expanded beyond Clara's wildest dreams. But more than any of those external markers of success, they had love. Deep, abiding, tested by time and trial, and found to be unbreakable. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly. "For what?" Clara asked. "For seeing something worthwhile in a lonely cowboy. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For building this life with me. For every loaf of bread, every meal, every moment of every day. Thank you, Clara." Clara squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being the kind of man who appreciates bread as more than just food. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am. Thank you for being my partner, my love, my home." As the years continued, they settled into the gentle rhythm of old age. There were health scares, as was inevitable, but they faced them together. When Nathan had a bad bout of pneumonia in 1915, Clara nursed him back to health with the same determination she brought to everything. When Clara broke her wrist in 1917, Nathan learned to help her in the kitchen, his large, weathered hands surprisingly deft with dough. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922 with a large party attended by their children, grandchildren, and what seemed like half of La Junta. Grace gave a toast, her voice thick with emotion. "My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single day. It is showing up for each other, working together, putting the other person first. They have lived that example for 40 years, and they have shown all of us what a true partnership looks like." Daniel added his own toast. "My mother's bread brought my father home, but it was their love that built an empire, not of money or power, but of family and community and purpose. We are all blessed to be part of their legacy." Nathan and Clara stood together, overwhelmed by the love in the room. They had built something that would outlast them, a family rooted in the values they held dear. In 1925, their first great-grandchild was born, Daniel's daughter's son. Holding the tiny baby, Clara marveled at the continuity of life. She had been so alone when she was 21, convinced her life was over. And now, at 64, She was surrounded by more family than she could have imagined. Nathan, at 68, moved more slowly now, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He still consulted on ranch matters when Grace asked his advice, though he was careful to let her make her own decisions. He spent his days reading, working in the garden, and sitting on the porch with Clara, watching the world go by. One evening in late summer of 1927, they sat on that porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "Clara," Nathan said suddenly, "I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life over again, I would not change a single thing." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Not a single thing? What about the hard years, the droughts, the times we did not know if we would make it?" "Not a single thing," Nathan repeated firmly. "Because all of it, every struggle, every triumph, every ordinary day I got to spend with you, and that makes it all worthwhile." Clara felt tears well up in her eyes. "You always did know how to make me cry, Nathan Morrison." "I speak the truth," Nathan said. "You are the love of my life, Clara. You always have been, from the moment I tasted your bread and knew my wandering days were over." "And you are mine," Clara said. "My unexpected blessing, my answered prayer, my home." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. They had seen so much change in their decades together. The Wild West they had known as young people was largely tamed now. Automobiles were common, electricity was everywhere, the world was smaller and faster than it had been, but some things remained constant: the love between a husband and wife, the comfort of family, the simple pleasure of fresh baked bread. Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1930 at the age of 73. Clara woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. She sat with him for a long time before calling for help, memorizing his face, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner for 48 years. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Nathan had touched many lives in his time in La Junta, and people came from across the state to pay their respects. But it was Clara who moved people most, standing dry-eyed and dignified at the graveside, though everyone knew her heart was breaking. After the funeral, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Clara finally allowed herself to cry. Grace held her mother as she sobbed, the grief pouring out of her in waves. "He was my everything," Clara wept. "How do I go on without him?" "You go on because that is what he would want," Grace said gently. "You go on because you have so much still to give, so many people who love you and need you. You go on because your story does not end with his death." And Clara did go on, though the world seemed dimmer without Nathan in it. She moved in with Grace and James at the ranch, unable to bear living alone in the house she had shared with Nathan. She continued to bake, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of measuring and kneading and shaping. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather, keeping his memory alive. She worked in the garden, attended church, visited with friends. She lived because Nathan would have wanted her to live. But every morning she baked bread, and every morning she remembered the young cowboy who had tasted it and told her it was like home. She remembered his shy smile, his gentle hands, his unwavering love. She remembered 48 years of partnership, of building a life together from nothing but hope and determination, and she was grateful for every moment, every memory, every loaf of bread they had shared. Clara lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 77. She was buried beside Nathan, their graves marked with a simple headstone that read, "Nathan and Clara Morrison, beloved parents and grandparents, together again." But their legacy lived on. Daniel's bakeries continued to thrive, eventually expanding to 8 locations across Colorado and New Mexico. Grace's ranch became one of the most successful in the state, eventually passed down to her own children. Thomas's paintings hung in galleries and homes across the country. Rose taught for 40 years, influencing hundreds of students. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across the country, but they all carried with them the lessons Nathan and Clara had taught: the value of hard work, the importance of family, the power of love expressed in everyday actions, and many of them carried on the tradition of baking bread. They used Clara's recipes, passed down through the generations, each loaf a connection to the woman who had built an empire one loaf at a time. In later years, when the grandchildren gathered for reunions, they would tell the story of how it all began. How a young woman, desperate and alone, had taken a job baking for ranch hands. How one quiet cowboy had tasted her bread and fallen in love. How from that simple beginning, a family had grown, strong and numerous, rooted in love and sustained by grace. The story became part of family lore, told and retold, embellished and polished until it took on the quality of legend. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. Love can begin anywhere, even in a ranch kitchen at 4 in the morning with the smell of baking bread filling the air. Nathan and Clara's story became a touchstone for future generations, a reminder that the greatest achievements are not measured in money or fame, but in lives well lived and love freely given. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was quieter than that, more enduring. It was the love of 2 ordinary people who chose each other every day, who built something beautiful together, who left the world better than they found it. And it all began with bread, the bread that tasted like home to a lonely cowboy. The bread that gave a grieving young woman a purpose. The bread that became the foundation of a business, a family, a legacy. Years later, one of Clara's great-great-grandchildren, a young woman who had inherited her talent for baking, opened a bakery in Denver. She called it Clara's Kitchen, and above the door, she hung a sign with words her great-great-grandmother had once said: "Bread is love made edible." On opening day, an elderly customer came in and bought a loaf of sourdough. He took a bite, and tears filled his eyes. "This tastes like home," he said. The young baker smiled, recognizing the echo of her family's story. That is exactly what it is supposed to taste like. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, each loaf of bread a testament to the love story that had started it all. Nathan and Clara's story lived on, not just in the memories of their descendants, but in the simple, profound act of baking bread with love and serving it to those who hunger for more than just food. They had built their lives on a foundation of love, hard work, and fresh baked bread. And in doing so, they had created something that transcended their individual lives, something that would endure as long as their descendants remembered to put love into everything they did. In the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the successful businesses or the thriving ranch, but the understanding that love expressed through everyday actions, through the simple gift of nourishing others, was the most powerful force in the world. Nathan had been right all those years ago. Clara's bread did taste like home. It tasted like love, like safety, like belonging. And in tasting it, he had found what he had been searching for all his life: a place to belong, someone to belong to, a home. And Clara, in choosing to say yes to his proposal and choosing to build a life with him, had found the same thing. Together, they had created a home not just for themselves, but for their children and grandchildren and all the generations that would come after. Their story, like the bread Clara baked every morning, was simple in its ingredients but complex in its execution. flour, water, salt, yeast, and time. Love, commitment, hard work, and patience. Mix them together in the right proportions. Tend them carefully, and something miraculous happens. Life rises like dough in a warm kitchen. Love grows and expands, filling all the empty spaces. And at the end, what remains is something nourishing and beautiful, something that sustains not just the body but the soul. Nathan and Clara Morrison understood this truth, lived it every day of their long lives together. And in doing so, they gave their family and their community a gift that could never be measured or repaid. They gave the gift of love, simple and pure and enduring. And it all began with bread, baked by a young woman's hands in the early morning darkness, tasted by a lonely cowboy who knew in that moment that his wandering days were over, that he had finally found his home.